I will stand up for Canadian interests. We are now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. We continue to believe deeply that there is a win-win-win opportunity for Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The G7 is fundamentally a gathering of the world's most advanced economies to talk about the economic challenges that we have in common. And there is one big economic challenge that is shared right across not just the G7, but much of the developed world. And that is, how do you reassure people that all the changes we're going through in our workplaces, from automation to AI to greater trade deals to globalization in general, how are these factors going to ensure that the growth we create is fairly shared by everyone? I mean, and when you look at the anxiety of the aggressive nationalism, the polarization, the insularity, the anti-trade, the anti-globalization, all those facets that are slipping into politics all around the world, it all stems down to an anxiety that people feel that the system we have might be good at creating growth, but it's not good at creating growth that is good for all citizens. And whether it was President Trump getting elected on a commitment to make America great again, which means bringing in people who felt left out by the recent success of the United States and the growth of the United States, whether it's the same motivations that led to questioning by the UK voters of their association with the European Union, we have a very similar challenge. How do we demonstrate that growth can be reassuring and confidence building for larger segments of our population? I mean, there are places that have exacerbated the fears that people have about their future, about their kids' future. Canada is one of those places that is working very hard to allay those fears. And having an honest and rigorous conversation about this shared challenge that we face and some of the solutions we should be putting forward to create growth that is better for everyone is exactly one of the things we're talking about. We continue to believe deeply that there is a win-win-win opportunity for Canada, Mexico, and the United States on improving, modernizing NAFTA. We're continuing to work constructively with the United States, with Mexico to do that. We know that trade is a very powerful lever to create opportunities and jobs and growth in our economies. We understand there is an anxiety about trade out there in sort of large segments of the population that don't feel that it has worked very well for them. And that is why, as a country, we've been working hard to make a case for trade, working hard to demonstrate that we can sign progressive trade deals like CETA or even the CPTPP with Asia, where we've demonstrated that issues like protection of the environment, gender equality, workers' rights are integral in creating the success of trade deals that create growth. In any trade deal, there are always ways to look for compromises, ways to understand that we can get to a win-win-win. But I've also said very clearly, and Canadians know this of me, that I will stand up for Canadian interests. I will only sign a deal that is good for Canada. And no NAFTA is better than a bad deal, and we've made that very clear with the President. We know that there is a good deal to be had that could create gains for all three of our countries. That's the nature of the non-zero-sum game when trade is done properly, but we are not going to move ahead just for the sake of moving ahead.
In Washington, a lot of people have been impressed by the way the Canadians in particular have galvanized the business community and the Canadian businesses to go to Congress people and senators. In fact, Wilbur Ross, I think the Commerce Secretary, said that the Canadian officials had spent more time in Capitol Hill than they had with the official negotiations. Do you find congressmen easier to deal with than the administration?
Well, I think one of the things that is an advantage for Canada is the proximity and the level of interconnectedness between Canada and the United States. I mean, if you think of many other countries, their only interface is through their embassies and their interactions. Well, Canada has a level of partnership with the United States that is unlike any two countries in the entire world. So when we talk about whether it's Prime Minister to President, whether it's members of Parliament to Congress, whether it's premiers to governors, whether it's legislators to legislators or business people to business people, there are huge and deep connections between us. And when we want to talk about the advantages of trade and the advantages of modernizing in NAFTA, we actually find that governors are extremely strong allies in that, and members of Congress are as well. I mean, they know, they see within their communities all the jobs that come from smooth access to the Canadian market. The U.S. sells more goods every year to Canada than it does to China, Japan, and the U.K. combined. We are their #1 customer, and there's no question that any disruption of that flow of goods, yes, would be terrible for the Canadian economy, but it would also be pretty terrible for a lot of U.S. jobs in an awful lot of industries. So making sure that we are making the case for something that, quite frankly, a lot of Americans take for granted, and rightly so. We've just always been there and always worked seamlessly together. So highlighting the benefits of what we've always had has been the work that we've done. And I really have to say that across political parties, the level of cooperation on this issue. I mean, you'll know that there's lots that I disagree with the official opposition and the other parties in the House. But on this issue of renegotiating NAFTA and the common front we've shown, not just from the different parties in Ottawa, but indeed from different parties in government across our provincial capitals, that has really been effective and strengthened our position in negotiations significantly with the United States, where it's easy to see that Democrats might have one perspective, Republicans another. Certain factions within the administration think one way, others think another way. There is not the same kind of unity that we've been able to bring to bear as Canadians, and I think that is not just to our credit on a moral level. It's actually an extremely useful advantage in our negotiations. We've spent close to a year negotiating the modernization of NAFTA. I think there's a moment where we should be able to move on to other things. I mean, in the meantime, we've gone and signed a number of trade deals. We are now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. I was raised to believe that the growth of the economy and protecting the environment go together. When you have more women or better gender balance on boards or in organizations, you actually get a better quality of decision making. Getting a pipeline to new markets across the Pacific is absolutely in the national interest. I was raised to believe that the growth of the economy and protecting the environment go together. And one of the things that we've seen time and time again through the polarization of politics is people forcing a choice. It's either the environment or the economy. When we know, certainly if you talk to Canadians, you hear clearly that people understand that creating a strong, growing economy for the long term also requires protecting the environment. And in order to be able to protect our environment, we do need to be able to have a strong and growing economy. So the idea that it's one or the other has always been, for me, a bit of a false road. So when we got elected 2.5 years ago, we made a very clear commitment because we felt that the previous government for 10 years hadn't done a very good job of protecting the environment, and because of that, they hadn't done a good job of growing the economy. We wanted to demonstrate that we could get public confidence in building big projects by both protecting the environment and moving forward in a way that contributes to economic growth. And that's why our plan to fight climate change features both a national price on pollution, things like a world-class oceans protection plan, but also getting our oil resources to new markets through responsible pipelines. one of the fundamental economic challenges we face in Canada is that because we only have one market, the United States, for our oil resources, we lose about $15 billion every year. That's a $15 billion discount because we're captive to their markets. So getting a pipeline to new markets across the Pacific is absolutely in the national interest. We don't intend to be in the pipeline business for the long term. There is a very strong business case for this pipeline, but we are going to ensure that it gets built so that we can get our resources to new markets.
I guess one of the questions, though, is how is nationalizing it going to make those pressures go away? Because there were environmental objections to this. There were other things that were holding it up. How is that going to? You're just going to steamroller all of that opposition?
The challenge that the pipeline proponent had was the political uncertainty involved when a province was determined to do everything it could to block the pipeline. When you shift the ownership of the pipeline from a private corporation to a government that has, a federal government that has explicit control over resource projects that go between provinces, a lot of the legal barriers and a lot of the challenge points actually disappear. We approved this pipeline under the existing regulatory authority that we had enhanced. The provincial government in British Columbia approved of that pipeline with strong conditions, which we absolutely agree with. The Alberta government obviously agrees with the pipeline. We have the authority to proceed, and it became a question of, is Canada able to actually get big projects built? And therefore, we're demonstrating that, yes, we will do what we need to do to get projects that we properly approved built.
Well, you're demonstrating that the public sector could do that, but you actually are sending a message maybe that a private sector investor should not expect to get this kind of infrastructure deal done in Canada.
But we have also seen a number of pipelines built over the past years, a number of large energy projects built that didn't need this kind of extraordinary intervention. This happened because one province decided to directly contest the federal government's authority to regulate and allow construction of interprovincial works. This has been a long-standing element of Canada's federation, of our system of rules. And the exceptional circumstances of a government going against the federal government's authority required us to take this exceptional step to demonstrate that when we approve of a project, we're going to move forward with it.
And if this comes up again, because you do get these kind of conflicts on big, important infrastructure projects, you're willing to nationalize again?
We will always look at things on a case-by-case basis, but as I've said, getting this pipeline built is in the national interest, and we are also very confident that as this pipeline gets built, the business case is certainly strong enough that there will be buyers for this pipeline. We don't intend on holding on to this pipeline for the long term. The fact that there is still a gap in outcomes, in power, in pay between men and women means that we're still not at the full potential of women contributing in our workforce. We know that creating better opportunities for women and girls at home and around the world is going to lead to not just more growth, but actually better outcomes. The issues that are causing so much of the political turbulence and the uncertainty around the world stem from fundamental anxieties that people have about the future, about their jobs, about their kids' jobs. And sharing what we've been able to do in Canada, which, as you know, we've been investing massively in AI. We've been investing massively in the kind of technological advances that, whether it's quantum computing or robotics or what have you, that will be disruptive to our workplaces and the global economy. But to do those at the same time as we are investing in direct and indirect supports for the middle class and people working hard to join it, whether we're investing in infrastructure in ways, from public transit to housing to green infrastructure, we're demonstrating that we are reassuring and giving people confidence in the future we're building together, and they will be integral players in the future we're building together through education, through retraining, through supports, that the kind of anxiety that is leading to what's happening in Italy and elsewhere isn't taking root to the same degree in Canada.
So how are you going to make this summit memorable for the reasons that you want it to be remembered for rather than the headlines? What's your plan?
My plan is to highlight that when we come together as leaders of the world's leading economies, we can actually tackle the things that are keeping Canadians worried and keeping all of our citizens worried, talk about growth that actually leaves room for everyone to participate. And one of the pieces of that, and one of the main points we're putting forward as part of the G7, is understanding that gender equality and including women in our success is not a moral argument, or it is a moral argument, but it's not just a moral argument, it's very much an economic argument. When we think over the growth that our economies have experienced over the past 20, 30 years, the growth that has been there has in large part been attributable to the entry into the workforce of strong, successful women. And the fact that there is still a gap in outcomes, in power, in pay between men and women means that we're still not at the full potential of women contributing in our workforce. And we know that creating better opportunities for women and girls at home and around the world is going to lead to not just more growth, but actually better outcomes. We all have seen the studies that have highlighted that when you have more women or better gender balance on boards or in organizations, you actually get a better quality of decision-making, better qualities of outcomes, better growth over the medium and long term. This is an argument, a very compelling argument, that you create better success, better growth for our countries and our world when we include women. And that's why instead of saying, giving a gender theme a specific focus within the G7, as is often the case with specific themes, we've actually made it a horizontal focus. We've put together a gender advisory council, put together of extraordinary leaders from around the world who have been at every ministerial meeting, who are part of every element of decision around and discussion around what the G7 is doing to make sure that we're thinking about including women and the impact on women and other intersectionalities on everything we do. And again, not as a moral argument, but as an economic argument, as not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. We know that if you want to solve a problem and you put a group of people who are pretty close to identical in their education path, in their identities, in their socioeconomic status together, you're not going to get the same kind of creative thinking or out-of-the-box solutions that you would actually get if you bring together a diverse group of experts from different fields, different backgrounds, different life stories, different perspectives. And if that's the case in solving a specific problem, it's even more the case when you're trying to do justice by serving an extraordinarily diverse, geographically, ethnically, historically, culturally country like Canada, and making sure that we have a broad range of voices to weigh in on the best way forward has been transformative in the kinds of discussions that are had, in the kinds of solutions that are put forward. Canada, well, by definition, maybe it's because of our winters, because of distance between our communities, we've always known we have to be there for our neighbors. We have to make sure that there is success for all of us. And we're eager to lean on each other to create that success. And that brings a mindset where we are aware that having good public schools, having a public health system, having having an opportunity to train and retrain workers in the job market, a strong safety net for people who lose their jobs so that they can retrain, which we've strengthened over the past years, income supports for low-income workers so that they can actually get better jobs in the medium terms to support their families, welcome and integration processes for immigrants, because we know that adds to a workforce at a time where our population is aging and the birth rate's not keeping up. These are the things that we've chosen to put forward as the right measures of success for Canada, and there are an awful lot of companies and wealthy individuals who realize that that is a much more sustainable path for the long term than the short-term approach that perhaps the U.S. is taking right now.
I guess it's just there's a lot of business people listening, well, right here, but certainly listening to what you just said, saying, this guy just doesn't get that we are losing competitiveness, and that may not affect the growth rate right now, but if you look at the kind of investments that they need to make, he's talking about, we don't want to be ruthless, we don't want success at any cost. Doesn't that sound a bit complacent? No,
on the contrary. I've been quite vocal about the fact that Canadians need to be more forward-thinking and innovative, more excited about the future, taking bigger risks around the world, taking more risks and smarter risks on investing in Canada. Absolutely. I'm just not going to accept that the single bottom line approach to business is going to be sustainable in a world where income inequality is driving political actions and reactions that are leading to instability. You have a lot of countries around the world that are democracies that are starting to backslide or moving actually in significant ways, and I'm not going to call Russia a democracy, but the president has announced that he's on his way to staying president for life. We see the same thing in China with the changes that Xi has made to the Communist Party structures. We see places where the democratic principles are being worn away. And I think it's really important for countries to stand against that, to actually demonstrate by reassuring their citizens that, no, we do think about success for everyone and not just success for the business owner as being the only sustainable model. I mean, yes, there's always going to be people who are much more successful than others, but even as I spoke with the business audience about the fact that I've raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% and I'm lowering them on the middle class, when the middle class and people working hard to join them have more money in their pockets, whether it's the new Canada Child Benefit we brought in or the new Canada Workers Benefit we're bringing in for low-income workers, when people who actually spend their money are more confident about having that money to spend, more confident about their future, about their kids' future, I have no worries that businesses are going to be able to be profitable and do very well when more people have confidence and money to spend in our society. That, for me, is perhaps it flies in the face of the trickle-down economics that people are still clinging to, but I don't believe in those. I believe that if you strengthen the middle class, if you strengthen the majority of the population that is worried about their future and don't have the kinds of depths of pockets that the business community does, that the entire society will do better and the political context will get much less polarized. And that ultimately is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in a world that is strained and polarized in its politics right now.